Now that we are starting to talk seriously about humans traveling to Mars, we need to get serious about how astronauts can survive on Mars. In addition to shelter and oxygen, one of the biggest challenges is how to grow food to sustain humans on Mars. It is a 9-month journey just to get to Mars, which has to be dealt with before landing on and starting a permanent food production once arriving on Mars. It has been suggested that maybe we could use something like MREs, the meals that the military uses. Instead of carrying all that ready-to-eat food on the same spaceship as the astronauts, ready-to-eat meals could be sent to Mars well in advance so that astronauts would have plenty to eat while getting settled, as well as time to develop and construct permanent food production facilities. But this would only be a short-term solution. One problem with ready-to-eat meals is that the shelf life may run out before a viable food production program could be established. With the 9-month-long trip to Mars and the time needed to establish these facilities, foods like these could be 5 to 7 years old by the time astronauts get food production established. Even though we would be sure that food packages are considered sterile when they leave Earth, there are still chemical reactions that take place. The nutritional content, color, and texture of this food will be decaying over time and could wind up having to be thrown out. And there are a lot of factors to consider in determining if food can even be grown on Mars. For example, growing plants on Mars requires more than just fertilizing the soil. Mars soil is actually harmful for plants and people because it contains a lot of chlorine in molecules called perchlorates. These are toxic molecules which interfere with the thyroid and would have to be dealt with before using the soil to grow food crops. On Earth, cyanobacteria, or blue-green algae, is a big problem and pollutes waterways. On Mars, cyanobacteria could thrive. The perchlorates are still toxic to humans, but the cyanobacteria could help neutralize some of the toxins and produce organic material suitable for growing plants. Actually, people talk about Martian soil, but there really is no such thing. Soil as we know it on Earth is a living thing full of life and organic matter. On Mars, there is no such thing as organics or living organisms covering the surface, but rather it is covered with a non-living sterile dust. It has been suggested that we could transport living soil microbes, bacteria, or organics to Mars. But study is being conducted on the advisability of sending things like that to another body in space. Adding nutrients and other additives to Martian soil may work, but we need to be cognizant of bringing microbial product to another planet. Besides, it may work for a while, but just when astronauts need it to produce food, they could find out that these nutrients and additives can't and did not survive. We need to know more about the sustainability and viability of such soil additives. Water is another problem. Water could be extracted from the Martian soil, but it would of course have to be desalinated. That brings up another problem with Mars soil. It is a very fine clay-like powder and dries out very quickly. Not good for plants. In addition, it also packs too tightly to let roots and root vegetables grow. More bad news for plants. This is why hydroponics is receiving so much interest and evaluation. There is virtually no atmosphere on Mars, but 95% of what is there is carbon dioxide. Humans can't breathe it, but plants would love it. Plants take in carbon dioxide and expel oxygen. To create the energy plants need to live, plants use a process called photosynthesis. Plants need a lot of nutrients, including nitrogen, which is a key component of chlorophyll, and which gives the plants their green color. Chlorophyll also gives plants the ability to capture light needed for photosynthesis. Then there is the problem with sunlight. Mars, being so much further away from our Sun, about 50 million miles further, means that there is significantly less sunlight to begin with. and the frequent large dust storms on Mars further reduce the already reduced amount of sunlight that reaches the planet's surface. So artificial lighting will also be needed to grow plants on Mars. One solution may be something like solar panels connected to electric lights or fiber optics to concentrate and transmit light directly to the plants. Then there is the extreme temperature. The average temperature on Mars is minus 81 degrees Fahrenheit. Now that's colder than our north or south poles on Earth. So a protective temperature-controlled environment would have to be established, not only for temperature protection, but also protection from those basketball-sized meteorites that come in at high speed and could destroy small pressurized transparent greenhouses. Another thing to consider is deep space radiation and its effect on food, which is an unknown at this time. And unfortunately, there is no way to duplicate that on Earth to test its effects on crops. Meanwhile, however, NASA is looking into having a small waypoint destination somewhere near the Moon. The idea is that we could send food there and keep it there for a while to see what effect deep space radiation might have on the food. The 3D printing of tools is pretty commonplace now, and even some 3D printing of food. But we are not yet at the point where we can 3D print food on Mars. Until technology evolves enough, 3D printing of food would not be a viable alternative for Mars. The trade-off would be if you can get enough food products out of a 3D printer to make it worth the mass and the volume it would take to get to Mars. Another important element to consider when growing food for astronauts is our reaction to the smell of food. Whether it is freshly baked bread, pasta sauce, or bacon frying, it is important to keep up the appetite level of astronauts. Unfortunately, Mars is made up primarily of iron, magnesium, sulfur, and acids. Humans can't breathe on Mars, which is probably a good thing because, well, Mars stinks. Based on the makeup of the planet and atmosphere, researchers have concluded that Mars smells like rotten eggs. The good news is that plants may be able to grow in Martian soil, but only with a lot of help. Then what about meat on Mars? Well, animal-based systems will not be viable on Mars, but protein could be produced through cellular agriculture and precision fermentation. Cellular agriculture actually involves taking stem cell samples from animals and growing them in the lab to create cuts of meat identical to those from the animal agriculture. Aleph Farms, an Israeli company, has been producing cultured meat and is the first to do it in space. Cells from a cow or any animal are fed the things they need to grow. The cells multiply until muscle tissue forms and eventually becomes meat that you can eat. Although this sounds promising, there is a bit of a problem with meat grown in space. It is very hard to grow in any significant quantity. The other problem with meat grown in space is that of sterility and bacteria. Animal cells grow very slowly, and any bacteria or fungus that got into the culture would grow much faster than the animal cells. The bacteria and fungus would just take over, and you would have to throw it away. Any contamination would be disastrous for a Martian community. So where are we on the viability of food production on Mars? With all the challenges and stumbling blocks, scientists are confident that we are making strides in our ability to produce food in the not-so-distant future that will be able to support the nutritional needs of living on Mars and beyond.